Hello, Research Rockstars, and welcome to another episode of Conversations for Research Rockstars. I'm your host, Catherine Koristoff. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about how to avoid analysis bias when conducting global research studies. Now, for some of our friends who work in market research and customer insights, you are likely working for global brands. And global brands would include companies like Coca-Cola, Apple, Google, Toyota, McDonald's, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Adidas, Intel, Nestle, and so on. If you're doing market research and customer insights work for those kinds of companies, then you will very likely be conducting global research at some point. I'm not just talking about doing research in 1, 2, or 3 countries. I'm talking about doing studies where you'll likely be collecting data, whether qualitative or quantitative, in perhaps 8, 10, or even 20 countries at a time, really global research. And one of the things that can happen when you're conducting global research is you can inadvertently inject some of your own biases when analyzing and summarizing the results. We don't want that to happen to you. So that's why we're going to do this episode today, and I hope you find it very valuable. Please note that this episode does include an excerpt from the Research Rockstar course on conducting global market research. If you're already a Research Rockstar Backstage Pass member, you can get the full video lesson on the training portal. Thanks. So one of the things that we have to start thinking about when we're getting ready to analyze data is whether or not researchers have bias, because this could have implications for how we analyze our data. Let me explain. What types of bias might apply, and how might that impact us when we're analyzing our data? We do have biases. Researchers, even though we really try to be objective and we try to be thorough in how we're analyzing our data, we are humans and we have biases. And these biases can result in our misinterpretation of our research results. One of the common things is that we may have sort of a confirmation bias effect. So confirmation bias, of course, is a very well-known source of bias. And it's about tending to see things that we are expecting to find. If I believe that people in a particular country are going to be more price sensitive than people in a different country, guess what I tend to find? I have to be careful to keep that out of my analysis and make sure I'm really challenging what I'm doing with my analysis and make sure I'm not injecting any of my own personal biases. There's also this idea of inattentional blindness, which is a really interesting concept. If it's a new phrase for you, I suggest you go over to YouTube and search for it there. There's some very interesting videos that demonstrate it. But basically, inattentional blindness is a tendency to miss things that are right in front of us because we're not expecting them. And so in certain countries, because we may have biases or assumptions about people in those countries, when we're analyzing our data, we may miss something that's right in front of us because we're not expecting to see it. And what else? What else might be an important type of bias that we might have? Can you think of one more? Another important type of bias is cultural bias, just by virtue of the fact of where I was born, how I was raised, what kind of education I have, what kind of religions I was exposed to growing up. I have certain lenses that I see the world through. Now, as a researcher, I try really hard not to do that, but it is sort of baked into my brain and I can't help it. I have to be very vigilant. And this really can have an impact on how you interpret things. So for example, one study that I was involved with, I wasn't the lead on this study, but I was involved with it, had to do with food behaviors in different countries. And one of the things that came up in one of our meetings was somebody observed that in some of the countries, we were seeing a lot more consumption of soup as the main part of the evening meal. And the assumption that one of the researchers was making was that that must be driven by finances, that maybe in this country that people don't want to spend a lot of money on dinner. And so soup can be a less expensive choice. Maybe, maybe not. In some cultures, soup is just very common and can be delicious. And so that's an example of a researcher from a country where soup is not typically the main course in the evening meal, making an assumption based on their own culture. That's the kind of stuff that can be really hard to spot, but we have to be really vigilant about. And part of the way we can solve for some of this bias is by making sure that we are collaborating with others on the analysis. I wouldn't have wanted the researcher who assumed soup was a low cost, it was preferred because of cost, to have been the only researcher participating in that analysis, right? But because there was a room of us and other people had the idea that maybe there were other considerations and it wasn't just money, then we were able to explore our findings in a more comprehensive, less biased way. Collaboration aids analysis. And when we're doing global research, it can be very helpful to have people from other countries participate in the analysis. Have an analysis party, if you will. Bring some of the key results into a meeting where people from different countries are able to participate, share some of the early results, understand how they're interpreting it. Are these findings surprising? Are they consistent with their own in-country experiences? Is there something that they can share with us to help us sort of understand more about the context of the results we're finding in that country? So in-country collaboration can be hugely important. Now, collaboration is always great for analysis, right? You're always going to get better analysis and interpretation when you have more than one person doing it and then writing it up. But especially for global studies, collaboration can be hugely important, and try to avoid over-relying on email as a substitute for meetings. It's just not the same. If you really want to dive into, hey, we saw this interesting result varied by country, and we'd really like to understand what's going on more here, having people participate in that in real time in a conversation is definitely ideal. Now, I do hope you enjoyed this episode of Conversations for Research Rockstars. The topic of conducting global market research really is fascinating. These are complex studies from start to finish, and I really want to make sure that you can do them with excellence. Are you already a Research Rockstar Backstage Pass member? Be sure to check out the video lesson on the training portal. Not yet a student? Do check out our memberships page on our website. Please note that Conversations for Research Rockstars is a video podcast that is also available in audio form on your favorite podcast platforms. We hope you enjoyed it and got real value out of it. And if you did, please do review and subscribe. Thanks.